And welcome to Kickstart online webinar here at Glasgow Caledonian University. My name is Branka Dimitrijević and I will moderate today's event. Our seminars and webinars disseminate the outcomes of feasibility studies and academic consultancy undertaken by 7 Scottish universities in collaboration with small to medium-sized enterprises. These studies focus on sustainable building design and refurbishment. The project is funded by European Regional Development Fund and Scottish Government CIC program, which is currently managed by Scottish Funding Council. This is a live event, so if we have a fire alarm interruption, we will have to stop, but we will continue later. But if you cannot join us, then you can watch a video recording, which will be available in a few days on our website. We plan to finish with presentations around 1:30, and then there will be 30 minutes for questions and answers. Our online viewers can ask questions by using the chat facility, and our speakers will answer immediately. If some answers cannot be provided until 2 o'clock, then they will be sent by email to everyone who asks questions. So today's seminar is entitled Evaluating and Improving a Model for Reducing Fuel Poverty. This was a study undertaken by Edinburgh Napier University in collaboration with SOLAS Scotland Ltd. Our speakers today are Julio Bros Williamson from Edinburgh Napier University and Graham McLennan, Director of SOLAS Scotland. I would now kindly ask Julio to start with his presentation.
Good afternoon. Welcome everyone who are joining us. My name is Julio Bros Williamson. I'm part of the Edinburgh Napier University and the Scottish Energy Centre. But I would like to begin by thanking Branka and the Kickstart team for granting us this opportunity to work with SOLAS and also for facilitating this webinar. As Branka mentioned, the title of this work, this academic consultancy, is related to fuel poverty, and the official title is Evaluating and Improving a Model for Reducing Fuel Poverty in line with the LESS model, which stands for the Local Energy Saving Scheme. During this webinar, I'll be going through a series of topics that relate back to the report that we've produced. I will first talk about the project partners and the relationship between Edinburgh Napier and SOLAS, and then I would have continue with a brief introduction. Later on, talking about the brief, the actual elements of the study. I would then hand over to Graham McLean, looking into just an overview of how the LESS model operates and works, with a case study embedded there. I would later on look into some of the issues concerning around fuel poverty, energy demands in Scotland. We'll also be looking at the Green Deal and the ECO and how that plays a big part in this model. Also looking at case studies, both similar case studies to the LESS model, and also looking at a case study within LESS and how that operates. And then finally looking at the financial model and some conclusions. In terms of the project partners, as I said, it's mainly the involvement of ourselves as the academic partner and also SOLAS Scotland, who facilitate and manage this model. As I mentioned before, it's an academic consultancy which really looks at reviewing and evaluating this model. The main focus is on fuel poverty and how we can deal with it and how this model can really be replicated in other areas. and can properly operate in a wider scope in Scotland. As I mentioned before, the LESS model is what we'll be concentrating on, which really is quite an important model that's in operations now. And it's been operating mainly in two areas in the west side of Scotland, mainly Inverclyde and North Ayrshire, but at different stages and at different levels. It has also been operating in West and East Dunbartonshire and Argyll and Bute. Just as a small introduction to fuel poverty and the scheme itself, fuel poverty in Scotland really relates to how housing owners and housing people who occupy many dwellings have to deal with poor housing standards and inefficient ways of heating these homes, and looking at areas where people economically struggle to pay energy bills and to actually have a comfortable places to live in. A lot of the times health issues can arise and quality of life can be a problem, and those are the effects of fuel poverty. The kind of official significance of fuel poverty really comes down to when an individual or a homeowner spends more than 10% of their household's income in actually paying for energy, and really struggles to withstand this payment because of their circumstances. And most of these people relate to this core group of people who suffer from fuel poverty. Most of the times, people that are unemployed, people that are pensioners, etc., that struggle economically. I mean, some statistics show that for every 1% fuel price increase in whether it's electricity or gas, at least around 40,000 households can fall into fuel poverty at different stages and at different levels. But that's a statistic that is quite predominant. It oscillates between 1% and 5%, depending on different regions. I mean, not all fuel poverty is caused by poor dwelling and the thermal standards of these buildings. Really, sometimes it's a lot to do with how adequate and how well administered the energy within the household takes place, and the payments and how well those are taken. Sometimes payments can be just forgotten, and bills can be forgotten with direct debits, etc., and that can cause some problems that are not always addressed. I mean, dealing with energy providers is also an issue, with having false energy bills, having false readings, etc. That can also be a struggle. That can maybe sometimes can end up with debt with housing owners. I mean, the main objective of the Scottish Government is really to have as many of these families leap away from fuel poverty, and so that they don't suffer thermally and economically. Many kind of organisations are dealing with this within the Scottish Government, with different schemes, with different programmes, and LESS is part of that, and is quite an important element in fuel poverty in Scotland. In terms of the brief of the study and the work that was developed, really the prime importance and the topic that we try to address and how to solve it really is to provide this independent review and independent assessment of the model, which is in operation and has been in operation for the last 4 years, and just really validate whether it's going through a good path, and also look at the future towards it and how it can develop and grow. As I mentioned before, it mainly focuses on the west side of Scotland, and there's this idea of expanding it and growing throughout Scotland. I mean, there's big concerns over how the model is actually performing. So this independent kind of review would highlight these and really show people that it's operating and how it is performing. We will also be looking at comparing and evaluating against other UK models that might bring out some common ground within the different organisations, and also look at how it's actually operating, looking at a case study on how the LESS programme is actually operating, and we'll be talking about that further. In terms of the objectives, obviously tap in with the brief, really understanding and review the benefits, which I've mentioned, of the LESS model, evaluate the performance of the model and looking at improvements, which I've mentioned, looking at a case study and also comparing with other schemes, and also looking at where the LESS model can be implemented in other areas in Scotland. I will now pass over the microphone to Graham, who can explain a bit more about the LESS scheme in more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Julio. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Graham McLennan. I'm the Managing Director of SOLAS Scotland, which is a registered charity. Before I start, what I'd like to do is just thank Branka and Julio for the work that they've done and for facilitating this piece of work. It's very, very important to our board at SOLAS and to myself and my colleagues that we get the opportunity to work in this way and have an independent expert voice in terms of what we're trying to do. In this case, in terms of trying to help eradicate fuel poverty in Scotland. So thanks very much for that. As Julio said, what I'm going to do is just give a brief overview of the LESS model. And what we've done here is, as Julio mentioned earlier, the two areas that it's predominantly operating in just now in terms of activity are Inverclyde and North Ayrshire Council areas. As Julio mentioned, LESS is also operating to a greater or less extent in 3 other council areas in Scotland. So what we're going to do is concentrate on Inverclyde, which for those of you who don't know is probably about 25 miles west of Glasgow on the south coast of the River Clyde. Inverclyde is quite an interesting area in terms of the socio-economic mix and the housing mix within that area that's quite diverse. Some of the poorest areas in Western Europe, as well as some of the most affluent areas in the UK. So it gives us a great opportunity to explore the various issues. But fuel poverty certainly is a major issue in Inverclyde as it is across the country. Firstly, the partners involved in LESS are obviously extremely important. It very much is a partnership approach, and it's easy to say that. When you say it quick, it sounds easy, but to make it operate it is not just quite so easy. And I would like to publicly thank all those partners who have been involved in helping us develop and deliver the LESS model, and hopefully we can continue to work together to improve it. The council is crucial as the lead strategic partner in any given area. So far as LESS is concerned, as you can see, Inverclyde Council is involved in LESS within Inverclyde. The council's role is multifaceted, but essentially it's there as the strategic leader, the organisation who knows the area, who understands the priorities, who can divert resources, and who can actually champion the work that LESS does. It's important, and Julio will mention this later, that the levels of funding required to facilitate the LESS model in any given area from the council, or in fact the public sector in general, is minimal. And that's one of the primary reasons why it's now operating in 5 areas, and potentially, Julio will mention this later, could facilitate it being taken out further. The council's role is therefore, as I say, to facilitate the partnership and to act as the strategic leader, and to Obviously, there's an element of trust involved in a local authority being involved in a partnership when it comes to, in this case, getting out there in amongst vulnerable householders in particular, that element of trust is crucial. As I mentioned before, SOLAS is a registered charity, SOLAS Scotland, and we do our business and achieve our strategic objectives, which are to eradicate fuel poverty and create meaningful employment and sustainable opportunities for Scottish people through the workplace. We deliver that through a number of wholly owned trading subsidiaries of SOLAS Scotland, one of which is SOLAS Insulation. SOLAS's role, so far as LESS is concerned, is to work alongside the partners to do the sort of background work to facilitate the model, to coordinate it, to help council and other partners plan and deliver and evaluate. And as it happens within the areas that it's operating just now, we also deliver the vast majority of the work on the ground. Although as a potentially replicable model, that's not necessarily a prerequisite. And there were plenty of other like-minded organisations across the country who are just as capable as SOLAS of delivering services that would facilitate LESS. So it's important for me to emphasise that whilst LESS is what we believe is an effective model in addressing fuel poverty, it's not about SOLAS as such, but what we want to do, and this is why Kickstart Online has been so helpful, is we want to share the model and to see whether or not it's something that we could look to potentially replicate to help a wider group of people. Other partners involved, Scottish Hydroelectric there. Anyone looking in from Scottish Hydroelectric as it was would probably not be too chuffed because they're now officially and only known as SSE, I believe. But apologies, that's my fault for putting the wrong logo on the slides there. SSE, as one of the so-called Big Six, one of the utility companies, one of the energy supply companies, is heavily involved through the funding mechanism, which is CERT, which I'm sure most of the viewers and listeners will know all about. Predominant facet of LESS is that it levers CERT funding and in some cases CESP funding into the local area and can help vulnerable householders access that. There's been significant level of funds invested into LESS, predominantly from SSE, but not entirely. We do access CERT funding from other of the utility companies, and that's been a highly successful mechanism, which I believe is appreciated by the CERT organisations themselves, obviously as well as council and other stakeholders, not least the householders, in facilitating grant-aided work. We'll talk later on. Many people will know that CERT and CESP is coming to an end, officially at the end of this calendar year, and will be replaced by Green Deal and ECO, and we'll talk later about that. The other parties, just very briefly, the Energy Saving Scotland Advice Centre, we mentioned there Strathclyde and Central. That's run by the WISE Group, a fellow social enterprise based in Glasgow. The SACs, as many people will know, amongst other things, operate the Energy Assistance Package mechanism, which is one of the government's, Scottish Government's flagships in terms of eradicating fuel poverty. We work in an Inverclyde case with the SAC Strathclyde and Central. North Ayrshire, we have the pleasure of working with the Ayrshire Energy Agency, who operate the SAC in North Ayrshire, and then also in Argyll and Bute we work with Changeworks, who operate the Highlands and Islands SAC, and that includes Argyll and Bute, as you'll be aware. The relationship with the SACs is very much about working together to add value to our respective services, and certainly from our perspective, the SACs have been very value-adding to LESS, and hopefully the SACs will reciprocate by saying that we believe from feedback that LESS has helped to add value to the Energy Assistance Package. That's certainly the intention. The Pension Service are also signed up and are able to provide welfare benefits advice to vulnerable householders to ensure that we're optimising the income that household has available to it. Again, listeners will be aware, viewers, that many millions of pounds go in unclaimed welfare benefits every year, and obviously from a financial perspective we want to ensure that people get everything they're entitled to. I think it's worthwhile just restating here that LESS seeks to lever services that are already available and bought and paid for. We would not knowingly create something that already exists. We simply seek to fill gaps and add value. What we'll go into now is to look and see that there are a larger number of locally based organisations, some of which are national, but all of whom have local service provision in Inverclyde, and in many cases actually across a large number of council areas within Scotland. LESS is very much a bottom-up, community-focused service, and what we're trying to do here is to access local networks and local services so that we can get in amongst the most vulnerable householders. So rather than trying to create our own network of providers and our own network of services, again, it's back to this: let's identify what exists and try to add value and lever that. You can see there that there's a number of organisations mentioned, many of which, in fact, I'll say all of which you'll have heard of. They probably operate to a greater or lesser extent in your council area and right across the country. Macmillan Cancer Support, we have a very strong referral mechanism with Macmillan Cancer Support, which we're really quite proud of, in fact. The people who are diagnosed with cancer are in many cases almost immediately hit with all sorts of major issues in their life, and fuel poverty is one of them. At a time when perhaps you or a member of your family who may be a major breadwinner in the family is diagnosed with cancer, you may face a situation where your household income is slashed quite significantly immediately, and you're also in a scenario where, as a result of your health issues, you need to remain as warm and comfortable as possible. I mean, that's just that's on a human level, never mind a health level. And it's fantastic that we can offer that level of help to cancer sufferers. And it's great that Macmillan Cancer Support sees the value in referring their clients to us. Money Matters and other financial fitness services that are available widely, including the pension service, but there are other locally based services that provide similar benefit health checks, financial fitness advice, debt advice, money management advice, and we seek to lever them. Welfare Rights, Carer Centre, who are involved in obviously people who are caring for people who have disabilities and enduring illness, etc., is trying to get into their clients and help them. And obviously Registered Social Landlords who are active across the country and trying to help their tenants, as well as the Energy Saving Scotland advice centres that I've mentioned. So the LESS model is really about, as I've mentioned, addressing fuel poverty, extending the availability of practical help as much as we possibly can in the home, face-to-face, through a trusting relationship, to help the most vulnerable people, and as Julio has mentioned, those who are most vulnerable to fuel poverty, which sadly continues to rise in Scotland and across the UK, despite all of our efforts to redress that. Levering referral mechanisms and making sure that we can access the most vulnerable people through existing networks in a trusted way. Accessing funding and bringing in monies from the various sources, which can be very confusing, not least to, well, it's confusing enough to myself, and I'm supposed to know about the market, but to a vulnerable householder who perhaps is elderly or disabled, or is running about looking after a young family, or who has cancer, or in many of the different scenarios, understanding all the funding that's available is very, very difficult and often leads to inaction. One of the things we try to do through LESS is to make it quite straightforward for people, and we leave no stone unturned. And as I mentioned, that one of the things that we do is the Energy Assistance Package, which is a flagship for the Scottish Government, is to seek to add value to that and make sure that people who are vulnerable and are entitled to that help get the help that they need, and can continue to see that through what can quite often be a convoluted and reasonably lengthy customer journey, is to make sure that they get what they're entitled to, and that's seen right through to the end. Okay, thanks. Reducing energy consumption of every householder is one of the objectives within a LESS area. By the way, LESS is, when it's up and running in a council area, is available to every householder within that area from day one. It's important to emphasise there's no exclusion. It's available once it's up and running to everybody across tenure, although it is predominantly targeted on the private sector. It's through physical improvements to the building fabric, insulation, draft proofing, and a range of other measures which are available to help people save energy, as you know, as part of a structured, concentrated, area-based programme with the council at the centre, and that kind of local feel to it as a result of that. Optimising income is something that we've mentioned earlier, through making sure that people get all the welfare benefits and pensions they're entitled to, through existing services, and through robust referral mechanisms and feedback systems, etc. SOLAS and LESS does not deliver those services, specifically those ones directly. They are managed through existing services, as I've said already. And also, as I've said, as part of the deal, SOLAS as a charity has the objective of creating sustainable employment, and we want to continue to do that, either directly or indirectly through organisations that we work with, is to try to ensure that local services are there, that they're developed, that they're high quality, and that they continue to be there. And there are opportunities moving forward within the carbon reduction fuel poverty industry to continue to seek opportunities alongside the key stakeholders in Scotland to continue to deliver on that particular objective. Thanks. Julio will talk later about the propensity for LESS to be a replicable model, and we want to make sure that it's an efficient model, and we'll look at the funding mechanisms later, and hopefully we can demonstrate that there appears to be a reasonably compelling case to suggest that it may well be replicable and efficient. We want to generate social capital and synergy. Again, you know, buzzwords, but in reality what that means is we want to develop long-term trusting partnerships at the local level with consumer and customer at the focal point, and make that a long-term arrangement. One of the criticisms that I have heard over the years about the attempts to eradicate fuel poverty is the sort of turning the tap on, turning the tap off scenario. Funding mechanisms, partnerships come and go. You know, services are parachuted in and parachuted out. LESS is an attempt genuinely at the ground with the council at the centre and all the relevant stakeholders to be involved in building something that will be there in the long term. And I think LESS, probably in the fact it's been on the go for 4 years now in Inverclyde, and has been picked up in other areas, would appear to be something that has a bit of robustness about it. And also to facilitate and encourage people to participate and act and take some pride in what's available to them and with them in the local area. It's very difficult, as I've said earlier, for vulnerable householders and those suffering from fuel poverty to sometimes, you know, get beyond the key issues that are facing them day in, day out in their life and with their families. What we want to do is to hold their hands and help them to actually take part and give them the opportunity to work with us to improve their lives. The slide here gives an indication of some of the stuff that's available through LESS. As I've mentioned, cert-backed insulation measures, currently energy advice, a home energy reporting, and an indication, you know, linked to EPC technology and capability that we have through the LESS model, to basically ensure that we're giving a range of services. This slide's slightly out of date. Again, I apologise for that. Again, that's my fault. The low energy light bulbs are something that's currently not available anymore. That's no longer facilitated through CERT, as some of you will be aware. The key facet of LESS, though, is that it's vertically integrated. It's focused on the customer. It's not just about the building fabric. It's not just about energy advice and advocacy. It's not just about welfare benefits. It's about the whole gamut and providing, as far as we can, a holistic suite of services and measures that are addressing fuel poverty in the customer's home face to face. So as you can see there, that's just some examples of the services that are available, and they're growing all the time as technologies develop and as funding mechanisms change. Okay, am I speaking to this slide, Julio? Do you want to take over?
Yeah, I mean, this just gives examples of the different funding mechanisms that Les taps into. I mean, Graham has mentioned the CERT, which is later going to evolve through the energy companies, and in this case, mainly with the Scottish Hydroelectric. And obviously, these are grants provided to householders to install insulation and cavity wall insulation or loft insulation, etc. And also the energy assistance package, which obviously secures that funding for a lot of people to upgrade their houses. I'll now kind of go through the approach taken and the methodology of the report. I've mentioned some of it in the objectives of this work. I mean, we got a lot of information with the meetings we had with the Solus team and the LES team. We got leaflets, we got guides and different information that they had already developed to really review it and see what that information was portraying to the clients and the people who are being taken through this model as tenants or house owners. So that was quite important to obviously set the scene and get as much information into and review it. We also looked at looking at different areas of improvement where a comparison of different models would really be implemented and see how they were working. I mean, many models that we looked at were actually providing very similar elements and advice, which was great to kind of look at that common side of things into different models around in the UK. But it was really locating elements that LES were providing that were extra, that was really important. And that was really portrayed and analysed during this evaluation of the actual model by visiting and going with one of the LES team members to different clients, etc. So the report really also had to analyse what Scotland is going through at the moment in terms of energy standards, in terms of building standards, etc., and just did a small review of the current situation as we stand. I mean, fuel poverty is quite high in the agenda of the Scottish Government, and obviously this influence of fuel prices and the actual condition of housing and current stock is quite important. And I mean, unfortunately, most of the people who are under this banner of fuel poverty are the elderly, the people who are receiving pensions, etc., and also the economically disadvantaged, unemployed people maybe, or just low-income families. And I mean, the element of fuel of thermally poor dwellings is quite important because they are the ones that are consuming more energy, and in order to obtain stable thermal temperatures and thermal conditions in a lot of these houses. So that's an important factor that has to be addressed, and which we included in the report on what was the state of Scotland in these aspects. We looked at different statistics and benchmarks, and I mean around 900,000 households in Scotland, which is 1/3, 1 in 3. Are estimated to be in fuel poverty, and this is according to the Energy Action Scotland report on fuel poverty overview. So I mean, different statistics, different work was. I think we've got a bit of a technical issue.
We're back.
Yeah, that's it back. Can't change the slide.
I'll ask our colleague Craig to help us in changing the next slide.
Is it not just a case of press the left mouse button? Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, we looked at other statistics. I mean, it's estimated, as I mentioned before, 5 million fuel-poor households are in the UK, which is quite important to point out. And obviously, that's a target to minimise that as much as possible. And that, I mean, the causes we've mentioned before: poor energy efficiency in dwellings, low disposable household income, which obviously it reflects the economic status that the country is going through, and also this increase in prices of fuel. And I mean, in Scotland, we've got around 40,000, 46,000 households that are under this banner. I can change the next slide. Yep. According to the most recent house conditions survey in Scotland, which really analysed the performance and the state of a lot of houses in Scotland back in 2010, that's the most recent one. Obviously, there's different scales of surveyed households, but in this case, it was just over 2,000 households surveyed. 70% were catalogued as not under fuel poor and under fuel poverty, but it's still, the statistics are quite high in terms of fuel poverty, at 19%. But what's important is the extreme fuel poverty households at 8%. So even though that's in comparison with the ones that are not in fuel poor, it's still quite high, which is quite important. I mean, this indicates over 600,000 households in Scotland are suffering to some degree of fuel poverty, whether it's in extreme situations or whether they just merely feel quite difficult to pay the household bills. So there's different scales. And this graph really shows this and how, I mean, you still have this fuel poor and extreme fuel poor households accounting to quite a lot. Next slide, please. We then looked at what the energy prices scenario in Scotland has been. And I mean, information from DEC on the most recent statistics have shown a slight increase from 2010 and 2011 prices, which is the more up-to-date statistics on both gas and electricity. So that plays a big part in how, since the late 1990s, early 2000s, we've had this kind of steep increase in prices. For example, in gas, from 2004-2005 payments, we had quite an increased price per year. For example, it was around £300 per year on gas payments per household, and it's nearly reaching, back in 2010, nearly 600, so nearly double that. And obviously that's a big impact on people. And recently in 2010-11, it's kind of dipped down and then is increasing again. And the same scenario is in electricity, where a more stable or kind of lower payments were kind of in the early 2000s and has increased up to £400 per year on electricity. I mean, these are averages, these are obviously statistics, particularly in Scotland. It was also important to look at the statistics around the housing conditions in Scotland, and again the Scottish Housing Conditions Survey gave us a lot of statistics and information on this. But it's important to maybe look at the areas where improvement could be addressed, and really that's where the LESS scheme and model could play a big part. And they already are dealing with this, but it was important to highlight what was out there. I mean, the majority of homes, obviously, the ones surveyed in the house condition survey, 800,000, were having this average of loft insulation, for example, between 100 and just under 200 millimetres deep insulation, when we know that the benchmark and best practice for loft insulation is between 250, maybe 300 millimetres. So a reduced number of households reach this standard, and that's an area where improvement has to play a big part. And we can see we can see this chart dividing it in private sector, social sector. So we can see that the private sector is the one that has got slightly better standards than the social sector, and that's an area we can focus on. In terms of walls, it was also good to evaluate that. A great deal of heat loss goes through the walls of a lot of our properties, and it's important to compare both cavity type walls and solid walls. We can see that most of the improvements have been done on cavity throughout, from 2007 and 2010, where the non-insulated ones have been reduced. Obviously, insulated ones have been increasing. So a lot of focus on cavity, but not so much so on solid walls, where they can pose a lot of technical problems, and obviously insulating those can be quite complicated. So there's been really a slight increase on the non-insulated ones. It's really quite stable, and hardly any have been insulated in the last 3-4 years. So that's really a focus that will be quite important to address. And then focusing a bit on the type of dwellings, the typology of the houses, and which ones emit more CO2 than others. I mean, we've got the kind of semi-detached, terraced, tenemental type buildings that are pre-1900, emitting quite a lot of CO2 emissions. But detached houses under that year or that period of construction, really poor standards, that most of these attached are underperforming. And the reason they are underperforming and emitting more CO2 emissions is because they're individual. Obviously, detached houses, they're more exposed, and obviously heat loss is higher. And in terms of how this figure and the different types of housing is improving, we can see again the detached houses emitting more per year throughout the last nearly 7-8 years. But I mean, in the last year, 2010, decreasing that number. But then again, it's still quite high in the amount of CO2 emissions. So that kind of gave us a picture of what the situation is at the moment in Scotland, and really gave us the tools to give some advice. We also did a small review, not too deep in terms of information, but nevertheless addressed it quite strongly in the report, was involvement of the LESS programme with the Green Deal and the ECO. Both are schemes that are due to start at the end of this year, and are under review, and also they become quite a challenging financial mechanism that is kind of being reviewed quite strongly by a lot of energy companies, and it's quite a hot topic these days, and it's something that will benefit homeowners. It will provide the financial side of improvement of these houses in all the areas that we just mentioned, loft insulation and walls. So in order to lower the energy bills, and the way this capital cost or this investment will be repaid will be through the savings obtained in energy. But obviously that that money being back and that repayment will signify that the energy bills will stay quite constant and very similar to before until it's repaid. So there's question marks on whether that will be quite beneficial for a fuel-poor household. So there's in the report we do address and look at Green Deal as being quite important. I mean, we look at the model and less as being quite important to deal with and take the Green Deal and Eco forward at different levels. So we've suggested really that the staff are at the LESS team and are kind of trained and briefed strongly on how the Green Deal will be applied. And in order to perform the calculations and fulfill this golden rule of the Green Deal, and obviously assigned incentives accordingly to the house owner. And as I mentioned, there's just debate over whether the Green Deal and Eco will actually reduce fuel poverty. So that's something we're quite aware of. Nevertheless, we think the LESS model should address it. We then, part of the report was, as I've mentioned before, was to evaluate other models that have been applied throughout the UK. We looked at various ones being quite effective, but we concentrated on one that's been going on since 2000, called the warm zone groups, which really focus on different areas that have been predominantly catalogued and shown to be fuel poor, the majority of people being under that banner, and obviously tries to reduce the number of households and really addresses on a community-based programs. So it was good to learn about the warm zones and really make a comparison with the model in question, the LESS model. So a lot of, I mean, the warm zones do address fuel poverty. They look at installing measures like thermal insulation, draft proofing, heating, new boilers, etc., and also create some advice and give some advice to people who are in fuel poor properties. I mean, the programme does offer home visits. Looks at benefit health check, very similar to LESS, looking at income as well, expenditure, and also elements of how we can apply benefits accordingly to help these low energy efficient households. And they do that by maybe referring to different companies in order to tackle loft insulation, draft proofing, cavity wall insulation, and all these kind of fabric intervention methods to reduce energy being wasted. But I make an emphasis on the referral service, because this is something that becomes, once it's been identified, it's referred back to third parties, which is not the case of LESS. So they also provide low-cost loft insulation, free energy light bulbs, cash back on A-rated appliances, different elements that can enhance and help the energy efficiency of the households. And as I say, similar to LESS, but we feel that this model or this scheme lacks this face-to-face action and this kind of interaction with the client to really solve the problems at hand. A lot of these elements in the warm zone are really through the phone. They're not really that community-based as such. We also, I think it was important to address one of the case studies and a real example of the LESS model being applied to a real client. So I was invited by the LESS team to participate and to be part of one of the visits to one of the clients that they had, which was very, very important for the production of this report. And the way the LESS team member, once they do this visit, they go through a series of questions and try and fill in one of these home energy advice log sheets, which they obviously note down the condition of the building, the energy type, and the different alternatives throughout the building, and what constraints they have and what problems they may have, obviously to later on evaluate and bring solutions. So this is this is the front page of the spreadsheet, and there's lots of information on the house that are noted. But I mean, within those elements, were the questions over fuel price, what the latest fuel bills were, looking at the type of appliances and the age of them. So really evaluating what the house is, the condition of the house, and also how the people and the house owners are feeling within that house, and how they're operating their energy, etc. And then, I mean, a series of advice and different solutions can be looked at in more detail. So the example and the visit that we conducted was a house located in Greenock, occupied by a person that was really struggling to pay their energy, and had really become quite concerned over how to pay past energy bills, and also looking into the future. So at the moment, I mean, this person had just a conventional energy meter, and they had an average payment of between £15 and £18 per week. And I mean, quite high winter energy bills as well, because the building was not very energy efficient, was actually lacking a lot of maintenance. A lot of their elements and building were in poor state. Energy prices during the winter, when temperatures were really low, were really quite high, between £80 and £90 per month. So that obviously brought that, a lot of their concerns over debt, and in this case, a debt of £620 was quite a big concern, and that was really why the client was keen to address it. So the LESS advisor and team member, what they do in these situations, especially when it's dealing with energy providers and energy bills, is that they take act and they act on behalf of the client to get and really address the problems directly with the energy provider. And this is really because the LESS advisor has quite a lot of experience, and also has dealt many a times with that energy provider in that area. So they're familiar with the problems, they're familiar with the people who are involved, so it's easier for them to deal with it and obviously come to an agreement. So as I said, I mean, the houses themselves, in that particular example, poorly fitted windows, unreliable storage heaters, drafts, etc. So that was a big concern. In terms of the solution and what eventually the service provided and how this was addressed, was really once the LESS team member had spoken to the energy provider, they had managed to reduce that debt down from £620 to £285, and taking the last year's debt into consideration, and come into with an agreement with the energy provider for a repayment, something that can be managed by the tenant and the house user, and can maybe slowly pay back that debt, and not pay it back with very high prices. So it was a debt recovery was looked on at £3.40 per week, instead of an expected and a previous £15 per week. So I mean, that £11 difference really helps people who are under fuel poverty. And then after that dispute was solved, looking at advice onto maybe keeping that amount of energy and input into energy bills throughout the summer, in order to build credit for that tenant, so that when higher energy bills presented themselves over in the winter period, that kind of increase wouldn't be felt so strongly. A more kind of constant payment throughout the year instead of big rises when winter reaches. And other recommendations on using direct debit and other alternatives were looked upon. Direct debit can confuse a lot of people because it's a payment that's done automatically. People don't recognise that they might be charged more for what they're actually consuming, and a lot of people don't have this kind of discipline of going back and rechecking their energy bills. And also, I mean, advice on different insulation grants and fitting of energy efficient light bulbs and other elements were also discussed. And finally, one service that was provided was to give free energy saving standby sockets, which can really contribute quite a lot on people's appliances to really reduce the amount of energy being lost by standby, etc. So easy advice and elements that can really improve and try and get people out of fuel poverty. These are some of the leaflets and information that are explained to these householders and tenants. Really, it summarises a lot of the services that the scheme provides. Looking at free appliances or substituting some of the ones that they have for A-rated or better performing appliances, looking at insulation, looking at different advice, phone numbers, etc. That can really help people and act quickly whenever they have any problems. And I mean, what's important about the LESS model, after reviewing it, after looking at how it operates, is really to explain how the financial model operates. And as Graham was explaining at the beginning, it's really important how, because Solar Scotland is a charity and because they provide the LESS model as one of their services to the community and private owners, etc., it's something that a lot of this money and a lot of the revenue that comes through this scheme from the different funding mechanisms, it's not something that's refed to as a profit. It's a financial model that has a very healthy retribution of funds that will always refeed itself back into the model in order to operate for a longer period and for more years ahead. So I mean, as I say, profits from home insulation, from PV services, from any other measures are really refed and back into the model. And what's important is to mention that these profits, because this is a social enterprise approach, a lot of this revenue is kind of refed and reused, and it can be used for community basis, for promotion, etc., etc. And I mean, this is really how the model operates and works. I mean, funding can be provided as mainly by energy suppliers, by using CERT and other funding mechanisms, community-focused groups, some of the funding provided by Department of Work and Pensions for the retired sector of people, and in some degree from the actual householders as well. It's kind of like a partnership, not fully from funding, from government funding, but also, if possible, the use of other mechanisms is also fed into it. I mean, and Graham can probably talk further about this model.
Thanks, Julio. Just briefly, Julio's mentioned that obviously the report will be available soon, and no doubt we'll cover that shortly. The key issues for me that have come out of the work that Julio has done is the issues around the finance model, it's just important to emphasise a couple of key things. The previous slide was about the social enterprise model and about the fact that if there are net profits generated as a result of the work of the LESS model, that these are not removed from the LESS model and are reinvested back through Solar Scotland into LESS services. That's absolutely crucial. If, as Julio mentioned, if the insulation that is being installed generates a net profit, the profit is not taken out of the LESS model to pay shareholders or owners of companies who install that insulation. To preempt a question that may come up in terms of considering the replicability and the capacity of social enterprise to deliver, then I would suggest that if fuel poverty, which is a key for the Scottish Government, is very closely aligned to things like creating sustainable economic regeneration, and social enterprise is a key facet of that, then I believe quite strongly that if social enterprise is a key facet of the LESS model, that absolutely that can be replicated and rolled out as far as is required. The other thing, just to emphasise in terms of the funding, is that the local authorities' role, as I said earlier, is not to fund LESS. The local authorities' role is as a key stakeholder at the local level. There's no funding required whatsoever from a local authority to establish LESS in their area, as I mentioned earlier. There is no specific funding allocated to LESS currently from the public sector at all. There's no money specifically for LESS services from the Scottish Government. Yes, we work with CIC. Yes, we work with the Department of Work and Pensions, and many other organisations who I mentioned earlier are already bought and paid for. It's important to emphasise that. It does not rely on the public sector to facilitate or fund it. It's predominantly, and this is something that's helped because I've been able to sort of step back and have others explain to me, it's predominantly funded at this point in time through the private sector, which is through CERT and CESP, which will be replaced by Green Deal and ECO. And yes, as we've mentioned, that will be a challenge, and the report goes into a little bit more detail. It's also funded through the able to pay, as they're classed, householders who, because of their socio-economic circumstances, make a contribution to the measures that are installed in their property. And it's important to emphasise that the CERT that's levered into LESS is no different to the CERT that's levered into any householder in the UK who has insulation installed. These are not special rates, they're not enhanced. Yes, we benefit from a fantastic relationship with SSE and a very supportive, collaborative arrangement, but these are standard CERT prices that are levered in. I think what we're seeing and has been shown through the report is that we're simply utilising that in a different way to facilitate what we believe is a very strong and sustainable model, which is what we have. So just wanted to emphasise those couple of points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julio and Graham, for your presentations. And we have quite a few questions from online audience. So let's start immediately with a question from Tony Colling of Tony's House Info. He says, hello, is the 10% of income a reasonable or sensible rule for fuel poverty? What would you say in the comment?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't regard it as a sensible one. I mean, not by just fixing a number, we can only have fuel poverty. As I explained, there's different areas where fuel poverty can arise, and I think that 10%, I mean, could rise. I mean, that's just really something that's been pointed out by the Scottish Government, and as a definition of fuel poverty, but it really englobes quite a lot of things.
I mean, it's Tony probably is aware that's an ongoing debate and discussion. Our position on it is that, you know, if you're going to make progress against something, you probably need to have some sort of target. We don't get necessarily too hung up on the specific definition. You know, that's from our perspective, you know, what we're trying to do is get out there and help people who tell us they're having problems with their fuel bills and that they can't afford them, to try and help them. So whether it's sensible or not, or realistic, I don't know, but the bottom line is that we all know that there are loads of people out there, 1 in 3 according to the recent measure, based on that 10% write-off, who are having problems paying their fuel bills, and I'm sure lots of people who are listening in today are of a similar mindset, which is that's really very concerning as a Scot, that so many people in our country are suffering in that way, and we really need to do something about it. There's lots and lots of stuff happening. It's fantastic that there's so many people out there trying to do things. What we're trying to do is to contribute to that and hopefully really make inroads into trying to make it a bit better in the progress against that. Fuel poverty numbers faster and better and quicker, and you know, let's get out there and do something about it.
Here's a question from Dave Tremlin of Conservation Joinery Services. What are you doing to influence government policy? I'm thinking about the AECB's research showing DEX figures, feed-in tariff, at 2011 rates, delivers carbon savings at a cost of £460 per tonne of carbon dioxide, while installing solid wall insulation on private houses delivers carbon savings for £30 to £40 per tonne. AECB's own calculations show that solid wall insulation could be even better value than this, with the carbon abatement cost close to zero, especially on off-gas grid houses. What response have you had from central government on these questions? Have you engaged or had any opportunity to engage?
Yep, just thanks for that. That's a really interesting point. What we've tried to do in terms of our product offerings as a social enterprise, in terms of taking it out through the LESS model, is to seek, as I think I briefly mentioned earlier, to try to increase and develop the offerings available, and that includes now internal and external insulation. The Westminster government, through the development of, as you'll know, the Green Deal and Eco, it would appear at this stage that there's going to be potentially a significant increase in the delivery of solid wall insulation. Predominantly, I understand, external, but there will be a fair chunk of internal insulation facilitated through Green Deal and Eco. So, you know, there's a debate, as you're probably aware right now, and Julio's slides sort of touched on that, and the Association for the Conservation of Energy did a piece of work for the Instafiber Consortium recently on what those changes will mean for retrofit of cavity wall and loft insulation, and there's a question mark in that industry about the fact that there's still quite a lot of that to be done too, and potentially it will be the sort of death knell of that particular industry. So I know that the NIA and Instafiber and a few others have fed back in, as you know, they have yourself, to the Green Deal Eco consultation, which we're waiting the outcome of. So we shall see. But yeah, I totally agree that we should constantly be looking at the best technologies, the most cost-effective ways of reducing fuel poverty and carbon emissions. And what we're trying to do at SOLAS, no doubt, you know, you may be doing this yourself, as any sensible business is trying to develop products and services that we believe there will be a demand for moving forward. And as I say, as a social enterprise, we're passionate about trying to ensure that that's sustainable, and that the profits, if we can generate profits, that they are not creamed away, that they are retained within the industry. So yeah, that's my kind of immediate response to your question. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Next question from Antoinette Charles of Glasgow Caledonian University. Could you name other models for reducing fuel poverty in Scotland, if you are aware?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned, well, there's a warm zone on the go in Aberdeen City, I believe, yeah. Obviously, the Energy Assistance Package, which is the Scottish Government's flagship, a model which we've mentioned a few times already in terms of the list model trying to add value to that at the local level. Obviously, there's an element, certainly within the CERT carbon emissions reduction target regime, which we've mentioned is going to become Green Deal and ECO. The energy company obligation is ECO, which will replace CERT on the 1st of January 2013. I believe that's where the private sector energy supply company obligation will go through into helping to eradicate fuel poverty. There's lots and lots of other stuff on the go at the local level as well, some of which I know about, some of which I don't. I think that's one of the key things I want to get across today, and the report has actually picked up on, is that it's trying to look at what's available, have an understanding of that, not try to reinvent the wheel, not try to be predatory, but to try to really genuinely work together to pick out what the best stuff is, and then if it's good enough and we can achieve it, is to try to replicate that. And that's really one of the things our board wanted Kickstart Online to facilitate through this report, and that's hopefully what we can start to generate that debate.
Thank you. Next question is from David Jenkins of Heriot-Watt University. How do you ensure you are targeting the technically fuel poor? And would you be able to use the same targeting approach with the new definition of fuel poverty from the recent Hills review?
Okay. The short answer to that is it's not easy come across a householder who either directly or through a referral from one of the mechanisms or one of the organisations that we mentioned earlier, we don't per se go through a process of allowing them to participate or not on the basis of what their technical specification of their circumstances is. We basically help them with whatever their concerns are. However, it's important and to try to evaluate whether or not the services that we're delivering have actually addressed fuel poverty. And on the back of that, we've just completed a piece of work which was conducted by Energy Action Scotland, Barbara Atterson and Scott Restrick, who some of you will know, it was specifically our energy advocacy and advice services, which is a key facet of LESS, which was how much of an inroad into getting people out of fuel poverty do those services have. And part of that was working very hard with Scott and Barbara to identify, when we get the referral, are you in fuel poverty? And if so, what services do we deliver and how do we get them out of fuel poverty as a result of those services? And that was looking at the energy ratings of the property on the back of the work that we, in many cases, facilitated, as well as issues about their energy debt and about their income. So we have worked very hard on that to try to make inroads in a tangible way in terms of what is a very difficult thing to quantify. And by the way, that report, if you would like a copy of that, will be online on SOLAS's website shortly. It's referred to, I believe, in this report as well. And I dare say if you want to contact me via the website, I can certainly send a copy electronically of that report to you or anyone else who wants it. It's actually very interesting reading to have someone like Scott Restrick and Barbara Atterson coming back to say these advice services, these advocacy services make a fundamental difference to someone's quality of life from a fuel poverty perspective before you even start to think about improving the quality of the thermal efficiency of the property.
And I think that face-to-face approach that the LESS team member has with the clients is really important, and how they can look at the technical aspects of the house, but also look at their social status and how that operates and what constraints they might have. But that kind of approach face-to-face is really, really important.
Thank you. Next question from Michael Hodgkinson of Michael Hodgkinson Consultancy. Would the key meter not actually put the price per unit up? This probably refers to part of your presentation where key meter was mentioned.
Implemented, yeah. Well, I mean, that was one of the solutions in terms of, I mean, that was one of the kind of options that was given. I mean, potentially it could rise the price, but I think with the advice that they were given on managing it and really having the energy put accordingly and used accordingly, that could be managed perfectly. It depends on the user, really.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because what it does is it again re-emphasises this aspect that Julio mentioned at the tail end of the last question, which is you've really got to get in amongst it. You've really got to have a good understanding of the overall suite of issues in relation to fuel poverty facing the householder, and have a, you know, all singing, all dancing, no stone uncovered, balanced solution produced. I can't comment on that particular one because, apart from anything else, I'm not an expert in that area. Unfortunately for me, I've got colleagues at SOLAS who are. But the solution that was facilitated there sounds to me as if it was as much about reducing the cash flow issues for that householder in terms of recovery and management of the debt, and reducing the stress levels associated with that at the same time as providing a balanced solution to their overall energy costs. So it's, I mean, as you know yourself, it's not just as simple as you know, one size fits all. You've really got to get in amongst it and have a holistic understanding of all the issues that face that individual householder, and try to create a balanced solution, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Another question from Peter Doherty of Doherty Consulting. Do you have more financial detail on how LESS works and balances the books?
Yes. There will be a little more detail in the report, without going into a huge amount of detail. Obviously, it's something that with the stakeholders at the local level, as we mentioned earlier, those involved in delivering LESS at local level, we are transparent so far as that's concerned with the councils and the others, and obviously as a charity, you know, we with social enterprises, wholly owned trading subsidiaries, there is an audit trail demonstrating and confirming what we've said about net profits, and if there are net profits, the reinvestment of them through gift aiding to SOLAS Scotland. We're happy to look at that, and I'm happy to speak with you, Peter. Yep. If you want to contact me directly, needless to say, through our accounts and through our monitoring by the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator, the details there. You know, one of the previous callers had asked about how we try to influence government. You know, it's a role that we play to an extent in terms of trying to share what we do and offer information, advice and support to the Scottish Government and the Westminster Government, and obviously this report and other things that we do through things like having a relationship with the Scottish Fuel Poverty Forum, etc. So, you know, the model and the financial aspects of it, I'm picking up from you, and hopefully you agree that it's crucial to the propensity and the opportunity to roll this out. And obviously, as we move down with these various stakeholders, we'll continue to share openly and transparently, as you would expect from a charity. You know, the detail that's there. There won't be a huge amount in this report, but I'm happy to speak privately with you, and you can rest assured that through the report and through other mechanisms, we are being transparent and open about how the model operates in reality and how we can continue to make it operate.
Okay. Well, I have one question while we are waiting for questions from our online viewers. I read your study, and there was one suggestion in the study which says an alternative that would be able to facilitate many problems is to create a digital set of guidelines and spreadsheets that could make visits more practical and cost efficient. By creating an easier access pathway, the assessor or LESS team member would be able to look at solutions easily and voice them to the client, while also digitally backing up to a server in the office. These solutions may be orientated towards how to deal with thermally upgrading different types of walls and components, while also indicating its cost and payback period. The possibility to link to Green Deal and eco guidelines would save time and calculations. So my question is, have the researchers developed the guidelines and spreadsheets that could be used by SOLAS and other service providers? Do you plan to continue collaboration in that context?
I mean, not in this report, we haven't developed, but it would really be from the current spreadsheets that they have to really come up with a kind of spreadsheet, digitally spreadsheet. And there might be areas where it can be enhanced. Definitely the Green Deal approach on calculating this golden rule would be implemented. And that's something that could be looked at in the future to actually bring that to reality. But it would definitely help, and the team leader, the less team person conducting a lot of these visits, to give solutions and options for funding straight away, and obviously that backing up to any files back in the office and the hub of the less team would also generate some kind of information that can be shared to other team leaders and later on bring other suggestions. So really it's just kind of a step forward in managing the information that the team members deal with and give solutions more quickly.
Considering the experience that you have had so far, do you think that less and similar organizations are now well positioned to deliver Green Deal and eco actions?
As you know, the issue with Green Deal and eco is that there's still quite a lot of unknowns, and it's a real challenge for everyone and anyone, from the top of the boards of the PLCs, who are energy supply companies, right down through to the smaller organisations who are trying to play a part in it. All we are doing, and all I understand a number of our colleagues in the industry are doing, is trying to position ourselves as best as possible to take a cognizance of what comes out of the consultation and how it's rolled out. We're all working hard, and Julio and I have spoken earlier, and I dare say what you've asked, Branka, about continuing collaboration is highly likely. That's one of the sort of side effects of SOLAS being able to benefit from working with Kickstart Online, is the opening the doors of collaboration and sharing knowledge and understanding. And I think SOLAS is no different to many other players in the industry, which is trying to get as much information as possible, respond to the information you have at the time, and try to be in a position where we can act. There's no doubt, by the way, that just as an aside, that there are many question marks and concerns within the industry over the removal of CERT and CESP and the introduction of Green Deal and eco. I'm not want to give the impression that it's all going to be plain sailing and easy. It's extremely hard work, and it's very, very challenging. I've mentioned earlier the work that ACE did on the looking at cavity wall loft insulation needs across the UK housing market, and how the introduction of Green Deal and eco may well adversely influence the progress through the demands there. But I suppose to the other side of the coin is it's likely to bring opportunities, and what we'll continue to do at SOLAS, and many of our colleagues will do across the industry, is for the benefit of the customers, and in our case particularly the fuel poor, to be positioned and be able to, as best we can, to make the best of whatever the marketplace and the mechanisms present to us.
Okay. Thank you very much. We do not have any more questions from online viewers. Any last message, anything else that you would like to add? If not, we are now close to the end of our webinar. So I would like, first of all, to thank you both for your talks and information. And now I would like also to draw attention of our viewers to our forthcoming events. The next webinar will be entitled Developing Homegrown Natural Fiber Insulation Products, and it is it will present the outcomes of a study undertaken by Glasgow Caledonian University in craft architecture. It will take place on 29th of March. Following that, we will have a webinar on implications of installation of solar photovoltaic panels on properties of Fairfield Housing Cooperative. And this was a case study that will be presented by Edinburgh Napier University, Glasgow School of Art, and Fairfield Housing Association on 13th of April. Following that, we will have a live conference entitled Micro Renewables for Buildings and Transport, Deliverables and Barriers. This will be held at Edinburgh Napier University on 18th of April. The rationale for this conference is that from 2013 to 2020, in the next 7 years, there is a key stage in Scotland's ambitions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve energy efficiency. The second stage of the Sullivan Report for the 2013 energy standards in new buildings will be due for consultation this year as well. The final details of the Green Deal will come before Parliament for enactment in 2012-2013. The changes in transport mode, future fuel systems, electrification of cars or alternative energy systems, and the future turnkey infrastructure required are reaching key milestones in research and development. This conference will address some of the opportunities, challenges, and advancements being undertaken in these areas. The range of speakers from universities and companies will provide useful insights to current and possible future states of play. There will be no live stream from this conference. It will not be transmitted online, so if you wish to attend, you will have to attend in person. Please access our website to see the conference program and to book places, and we look forward to welcoming you at our forthcoming events. Thank you very much for participating, asking questions, and thank you for watching. Thank you.